All Things Bike with Fred Thomas is brought to you by Frame and Wheel, eBay selling services for cyclists and bike shops throughout New England, and AD Bikes, the modern face of Austro-Daimler cycling and the bike company of the future.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Fred Thomas, and you are watching All Things Bike, brought to you by AD Bikes and Frame and Wheel. Today we are speaking with Lauri Boxer-Macomber, attorney at Kelly, Remmel and Zimmerman in Portland, Maine. Lauri is an expert in bicycle law, pedestrian law, and she is a member of the Bike Law USA network, and she's a cyclist. Lauri, welcome to All Things Bike.
Yes, thanks, Fred. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, a pleasure to have you down here. Now, have you been able to get out and ride your bike in the past week or so?
Oh, yes, of course. How can you not? It's been, incredibly great weather for riding.
But you were riding in Iowa, which is not exactly part of Maine.
Oh,
what was that like?
A couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week or two ago, I guess. It's hard to even keep track of time.
Summertime goes by a little bit faster. And what was that all about? I mean, is this a Bike Maine thing that's going on out there, or is it an endurance ride?
Well, so I went out to Iowa to support one of my colleagues in the Bike Law Network.
Oh, nice.
So Bike Law, which is a national network of attorneys that work proactively on legislation and policy issues, but also represent bicyclists who are involved in crashes. Bike Law sponsored what's called RAGBRAI, the Ride Across Iowa. So we were out there talking to cyclists, listening to what's going on nationally, supporting each other, and riding every day.
And you ride across the whole state, so we're talking 500 miles here, or?
Yeah, so actually I participated in 2 days of it, and then my husband and I did some touring on our own.
Civilized, that's the way to do it. So, but when you get together with the Bike Law USA network, which you just described, what's at the top of the agenda? I mean, what are you normally talking about?
Well, we talk about national efforts and things that have to do with what our states are doing on certain policy issues. Right. But we also, the nice thing about the network is that we are able to support one another when one of us has a novel issue or has a situation that requires, some additional brain power, I would say. Right. So we get together via conference call regularly, but then in person, we enjoy riding with one another, but then, just talking about cases, talking about ways that we can be more supportive of the community, respond to tragedies like Kalamazoo or other things that are going on. And And
Kalamazoo has been one of the most prominent events in the cycling community, and there's also been similar events, but much smaller, thankfully, in the state of Maine. What are some of the policies and legislation that have emerged from that event, or should emerge from those types of events, do you think?
Well, I think with that particular event, that event itself is an outlier because it involves substance abuse on top of recklessness. So unfortunately, that isn't it's a good example to show that people are vulnerable users when they're out there on the road. But that event, it teaches us about how the police and others are responding to bicycle crashes and what they can, it gives us a little bit of some insight into what methods they're using to investigate, what could they be doing better, and
how to improve the various processes and the reporting processes, for example. On that, what should cyclists be prepared to do if they ever find themselves in that kind of situation, a crash?
Right. So when people are involved in a crash, the first thing they want to do is make sure that they're safe.
Yeah, right.
Right. So
Yeah,
you get the medical
check the helmet. Yeah, make sure it's not broken.
Right. So get the medical care that they need. But then it's important to start recruiting people to start gathering evidence and documenting the scene as it is at the time of the crash, because every day that goes by you lose evidence. So right before I came here, I got a call about a crash that had happened last year, and I said to the person, absolutely happy to help, but gosh, it's a shame that I wasn't involved sooner. So what should people do? I mean, you want to document your injuries, you want to document the scene, you want to stay off social media, you want to talk to an attorney or someone else who can guide you through what's appropriate for giving statements, whether you even need to give statements to particular insurance companies, and talk to you about generally how the process goes, and you want to make a police report, obviously.
Yeah, right. And witnesses. I mean, I guess you can ask if there was a witness around. You'd want to ask what they saw. But when you say collect information about the scene, we're not talking about putting up little labels on the ground, sort of indicating where everything was. I mean, because you can't really leave a bike on the side of the road for a long period of time. You just mean gather general information.
Well, we do live in the age of, cellular telephones and electronic devices. So taking as many, photographs that you can or that others can, and really there are a lot of good people out there. So often when you ask about witnesses, people are willing to do things. I'm finding more and more that witnesses are snapping shots for bicyclists because they recognize that perhaps they're unconscious or that they're not in a position to document. So really it's, getting those people's names and contact information down, because those people often have some information, or they can say the 911 call was placed within, X number of minutes, or, and it helps piece together the bricks we need to make a case.
Right, and report immediately. Has that always been, or should I say, there seems to have been some disconnect between what law enforcement considers to be a crash, or compared to what a cyclist believes a crash to be. Is that fair to say? I mean, is there sometimes situations where a crash is not described as a crash by the law enforcement?
Yeah, in my opinion, our crash reporting system is flawed right now in the state of Maine.
How so? Yeah, elaborate. I mean, it sounds like it sounds important.
Well, it is important. It is very important. I think that there might be a disconnect in what people believe is a reportable crash. Now, Maine law spells it out in our statutory scheme. So if you go to Title 29A, which is the Motor Vehicle and Traffic Code, there is a statute that specifically addresses what needs to be reported on the Maine traffic crash reporting system, the statewide system. And that includes anytime someone's injured on a roadway, or anytime that someone suffers over $1,000 of property damage. So I have had a number of cases where bicyclists there's no contact with a motor vehicle, but the motor vehicle certainly has been responsible.
The big truck with the big draft blowing a cyclist off balance. Yeah.
That could be an example. Yeah, that one wasn't mine, but yes, absolutely. That could be an example. Or another situation where someone decides they're going to make a left turn in front of a bicyclist, and they have to do the bicyclist has to do some sort of an evasive maneuver and can crash. I had someone who's really badly hurt that way, or someone who pulled over into a path of travel of a bicyclist, and
Yeah, right. I see. Yeah. Well, is there some legislation on the cards to improve that? Do you think?
I think that piece, the legislation is actually in place. It's a matter of working with the state crash reporting system, the people that are behind the regulations, to make sure that each agency, each department is actually reporting what should be reported. So it's really on that level more of in this case, more of an educational and policy issue.
Right, and execution. Well, you did a lot of good work with, was it LD 1301? the law that introduced the concept of vulnerable user. And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought this was something you did with the Bicycle Coalition, one of their committees.
Right,
and,
yeah.
And sort of introduced this new and updated law, right? It sounded like it needed a lot of updating. Can you elaborate on the vulnerable user definition or concept?
Sure. First, I want to take a second to make sure that BCM, Bicycle Coalition of Maine, gets
Absolutely.
its kudos, because we all love Bicycle
Right.
Coalition of Maine, and
Sure.
I think it's important
It's
to pause for a minute.
It's essential to have an advocacy group in the state if you want to move up in the bike-friendly rankings.
Right.
So if you want to move up to number 1 where Washington is, Maine is 15 right now.
Right.
If you want to get up there, if you want to get top 10, you have to have an advocacy group and a whole lot of other things. But
Yeah.
digression, vulnerable user,
Yes.
it's important. And I mean I can provide some ammo, but fire away on that topic.
And what is a vulnerable user?
Yeah, what is a vulnerable user? Yeah.
Right. So a vulnerable user is anyone who doesn't have that steel case around them while they're on the roadway. So it could be a bicyclist, but you know what? It also could be your neighbor who works, on a paving contract
That's
for
right.
the DOT, or it could be someone who's out walking their dog or playing with their grandchild, playing basketball in the roadway.
Yep.
So it really touches all of us here in Maine, which is the very wonderful thing about this protection that we've got in place, is that we don't have a vulnerable user law, so to speak, as of yet. We have gotten the definition in the traffic code,
Right.
and we also have some required driver's education about vulnerable users,
Right.
but we're looking for additional protections, in the future for this population.
Yeah, well, before I get to that, I was fascinated to learn that vulnerable user also includes inline roller skaters, skateboarders, anyone who's guiding an animal, or anyone who's using a dog, for example, to guide them along the road, and it also includes the traffic policeman who's standing out there, guiding traffic. But there were also a lot of other revisions too. There were, it's much easier to get a ticket for going through a stop sign. Can you elaborate on some of the other sort of enhancements that were included in 1301?
Sure, yeah. There were other pieces that we were working on over the last couple of years, both in this past legislative session and the one before. Among those legislative efforts was the idea that we were going to get a presumption in favor of a bicyclist who has been passed too closely and a collision has resulted. So that was, a legislative session before this
Right.
one that we're talking about now. But then we also wanted, in this past legislative session, we wanted to add protections in both for bicyclists, but also for other traffic on the roadway, kind of to start talking about the fact that bicyclists too need to be abiding by the rules of the road, because when they don't, they're putting us all at risk.
Yeah, that's right. And I think now if you're a cyclist and you go through a yield sign, it's no longer a traffic infraction. If you go through a yield sign and cause an accident, it's a Class E criminal offense rather than a ticket. I'm not entirely sure that that's the case, but it seems like some of the language has been tightened up or stiffened up, so that if you're a cyclist and you're ignoring the rules, you are also subject to the consequences of the law. And
Right.
a lot of people don't get that, right? There's a lot of polarization, it seems, out there. Can you elaborate on that? Do you think there's us against them sort of attitude in between motorists and bikes?
Right. Well, so first, just quickly jumping back, I'm
no,
not sure
fine.
we're talking about the same thing, but there is one of the laws we worked on was actually with the yield, was that I believe that gave more protections to the bicyclists. Like, so if someone violated
all right.
a yield sign and
Okay,
drove
other way
into a
around, yeah, right.
cyclist, then the cyclist was afforded additional protection. But yeah, unfortunately, people view the bicyclists and motorists as two separate groups of people, rather
Right.
than looking at cyclists as moms and dads and business owners and people working at fast food restaurants, they look at us as just this, caricature of, someone who is always on a bike and always adverse to anyone in a car. But a lot of us drive cars too, and a lot of motorists actually ride bikes. But unfortunately, the tensions are high between the two groups, and
I guess that's
not healthy for anyone.
Yeah, and so it seems like it's everywhere. And what's the education? I guess is the best way to deal with that. Is there any educational initiative, do you think, out there to try and get the groups to sort of mellow out and see each other as human? Or?
Yeah, I think certainly that effort is being made, and Bicycle Coalition of Maine, again, is working on some public service announcements. We're trying to show that we are ambassadors to a better relationship rather than, adverse to everyone who drives a motor vehicle. So the coalition is actually trying to reach out to people through police, through educators. One of the big things on the horizon for the next legislative session is some proposed legislation involving mandatory bicycling education or traffic safety education, for students in elementary and secondary and even post-secondary schools.
Right, so that means not a driver's test, but some sort of structured environment where you learn how to ride your bike and control your bike in traffic. Is that what you're describing, you think?
Right. Some of the things that we hear from people who are not bicyclist lovers, like the people that are frustrated with bicyclists, they say, well, why aren't they getting any training? We have to get driver's ed. Why don't they have to get something? So one of the thoughts behind this effort is, let's get people the training they need, and let's get it from a young age. That's what happens in other parts of the world. But when people are doing things, like if you're riding a bike regularly, then you're more apt to see bikes on the roadways. I think that that's what the studies have shown as far as reducing crash rates, is that the more people bike and make that a part of their life when they're in a motor vehicle, they're gonna be more sensitive to the needs.
That's right. They're going to see it from the other side. But the training program sounds very useful, because many people may not be aware of just how effective it is to dress properly. For example, like have lights on your bike and wear visible clothing and even wear a helmet. It's amazing how many people I see riding a bike without a helmet. But on that, I'm just wondering, if you have lights on your bike and you're dressed very brightly, day glow and everything, does that give you any additional legal protection if you're involved in a crash, or is it not really going to make a difference?
Well, it's interesting. There is no statutory requirement that anyone wear high visibility clothing. However, there are laws surrounding lights and reflectors at certain times of the day. So certainly if you're abiding by the law, that's a good thing, and it's gonna, play out well for you in your case. But it doesn't hurt if you are more conspicuous. That's the key thing. If you're more visible, you want to be wearing the right, something that's going to make you visible. So it's not necessarily wearing a specific color, but it's wearing something that's going to make you stand out from from other traffic on the roadway.
Or it's going to indicate that you're making an effort to, play by the rules or fit or follow the rules of the road. And I'm pretty sure that drivers, I say this to everybody, but I think that if you're running lights on your bike and you are dressed using day glow, unfortunately, the fashion consequences are pretty dire. But if you're doing that kind of stuff, I think with lights, the drivers on some level see the lights and they respond, and they give you extra space. I think for the most part, ever since I started putting lights on my bike, I get the feeling that I'm getting a little bit more than 3 feet from from the cars that are coming by, and that's great. It makes me feel a lot more confident and safe. Now, I have another question, just in general terms. Some cases that you've worked on. There was Monica Semyon, I think. I don't know if you're familiar with that case, but could you talk about a case that you've worked on that shows trends,
right.
or Monica Semyon?
So that case is the Semyon case is not mine. That's
right. Okay.
Gary Goldberg. We for reasons that, we
talk about something that you know.
I do know that case, and that case actually is a wonderful case as far as setting precedent in Maine, because it talks about that bicyclists has a right to choose their placement on the roadway, which is an important piece, and that the bicyclist wasn't barred from bringing their claims simply because we have this statute that says that the bicyclist may pass on the right at his or her own risk, which the defense counsel and insurer was arguing that barred Ms. Semyon from bringing her claim. And the court held that no.
Right. So that set a precedent that passing on the right, a bicycle can do that, and that the driver or motorists really have to pay attention if they're going to be making a right-hand turn, I suppose.
Well, basically they said she can't even bring this claim because we have this thing that says she's assuming all risk by passing on the right. But what the court said is, no.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Comparative negligence applies, which means that if the jury finds that she was negligent for passing on the right, will reduce the jury verdict by the amount of her negligence. So they found she was 20% at fault for that crash.
Wow.
So the verdict was reduced by 20%, if I'm correct. I'm not sure if I've got the percentages down.
Right.
But that's what that case, and along with the right to travel where the bicyclist felt was safe in the roadway.
But from your the cases that you've worked on, what are they most? Are they involving the doors? The famous opening a door to be doored is or distracted driving. What's coming through? I'm
right now getting a lot of unsafe passes. So people violating the 3-foot law. So there are a number of those cases. Some cases involving intersections and turns in front of bicyclists, because I think, unfortunately, people don't realize the speed of bicyclists or the speed that bicyclists are traveling down a roadway, and so they often think that they can make that. Yeah, that's a global phenomenon, by the way. I mean, that's happened to me in Asia and Europe, and it happens all the time. It's a funny psychological effect. I think people think that they can make that turn before the bicycle. And the bicycle won't mind, but as far as it doesn't. It never works out that way. But when you said unsafe passing, so that just means a driver, a motorist, going 50 miles an hour or going fast within the 3-foot envelope, and the result being the cyclist falls or crashes. Right. Yeah. I think in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily one statutory violation. I'm finding that it's kind of like a parade of horribles where someone's driving too fast for the circumstances. So there's a statute in Maine that says you need to be, attendant to all circumstances on the roadway, including other traffic, which would mean bicycle traffic. So if you see a bicycle up ahead, even if the speed limit is 50 miles per hour, maybe that statute is telling you slow down. Back off a little bit. But also, then they're perhaps following too closely to begin with. So someone sees the bicyclist, rather than recognizing that there's oncoming traffic in the other lane, they still ride right up on the bicyclist and get the bicyclist and both motor vehicles into a situation where no one can get out of it without one person getting harmed, because the car can't move over into the opposing lane. This is the threading the needle. This is that will require an educational campaign, maybe very specific to that circumstance, because it frequently happens. And man, it must have happened to me this week. Right. Right.
Well, that's no, that's good. Well, you've done a great bit of work on insurance. This was you wrote an article about insurance for cyclists, and it was very interesting. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Right.
And maybe the key points. I mean, there was uninsured coverage
Right.
and medical pay coverage. And why did you write it?
Right. Well, I didn't write it to sell insurance. I'm not an insurance.
Yeah, no. But,
yeah, no. Right. No, I'm just saying.
But there was a moment.
Right. I mean, over time, it's not just me. It's my colleagues within this community, my colleagues within the bike law community, colleagues within the office. We see the same thing happening over and over again, that someone comes to us with catastrophic injuries or death, and there's just simply not enough insurance money available. So as cyclists, we don't necessarily, when we're getting ready to go for a ride, we're like, great weather, we want to get out there, we're not thinking, okay, what am I going to need if things go wrong, need in the way of coverage? And we think, well, I've got health insurance, or a lot of people don't, or if someone hits me, they should be responsible. But people don't realize that in Maine, we only require drivers to carry $50,000 worth of liability insurance and $2,000 worth of medical payment insurance, which means that if someone hits you and you have a head injury and you're out of work for a year and a half, and you have on top of that a broken femur, $50,000, even if the other driver carried that, that's not going to do it for you or your family. And I mean, even if you're not interested in doing it for yourself, I always tell people, what do you want for your wife and kids, or your husband and kids? Because it's, when you're already broken physically, having that financial insecurity is just horrific. So the piece I wrote really was, what can you do yourself proactively and defensively, I guess, to make sure that you're covered if someone else doesn't have the coverage you need? So in Maine, you can buy what's called underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. You can buy it when you're buying your liability insurance. And that way, if the other person's insurance doesn't cover you, you can tap into your own. Yeah. And then the other thing you can do is increase your medical payment coverage. And you do this on your auto policy, which seems kind of strange for bicyclists. But
it's right there. I mean, and the surprising thing is that the incremental cost of moving your liability coverage from $50,000 to $500,000 is almost immaterial. And the same thing, incremental cost of moving your coverage from $2,000 to $50,000 for the med pay.
Right.
Again, it's not much. And then and you're right. I mean, cyclists, when they're getting ready to ride, they're just, they're not saying, well, let me check my insurance policy. They're maybe, hopefully they're checking their lights, and then they're checking their tires, and checking out the traffic. But that was a great article, and it's gone up on the All Things Bike Facebook page, the link to it. So
Thank you.
We're getting trying to get everyone to read it. How about the kind of riding that you're doing? What kind of riding are you doing generally?
So I generally commute most of the year, which is not much.
But in January, you're out there in January?
No, I'm usually through November, December, depending on, I don't ride in the dark and ice combined. I will ride in the dark, but that combination. So I usually stop sometime in November, maybe December, and then I get back on late February, early March. But I do ride while it's still cold, and then I do, I ride with PVC women, but I don't race with PVC women, and I catch CCCP rides, but usually, on my own or with my husband and kids.
Yeah, well, that's great. And any particular rides that are your favorites, whether it's around here or in other states that we should know about?
Well, I mean, of course, I actually like to do the Monday night ride and Monday morning. I love heading out to Cousins early morning as the sun's rising. That's a really fun ride, just because it's peaceful, relatively flat. Just a good way to start your Monday.
That's right. Less traffic, and you can even go for a swim.
You can, really and I have done that many a times where I brought the bathing suit and taken a swim.
Right on. Wow. Good for you, Lauri. Well, thanks so much for coming down and giving us this valuable overview on all this stuff. Thanks
Wonderful.
so much.
Okay, great. Thanks.
That was Lauri Boxer-Macomber of Kelly, Remmel and Zimmerman. You can find out more about bike law at the Bike Law USA Network. You can also read her article on insurance for cyclists at the All Things Bike Facebook page. And that's all we have for you today. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.